Hello, friends. This is No Small Endeavor, and you're listening to part one of our two-part unabridged interview with Parker J. Palmer. In the first or second year of my being a professor, our provost, Craig Bledsoe, invited the Quaker writer and activist Parker Palmer to come lecture on one of his books called The Courage to Teach. And I remember in particular that Palmer called us, this room full of professors, to practice vulnerability of all things, to let our students see us as real human beings with our own hopes, struggles, aspirations, failures, and successes. And he called us to make education holistic, neither emotional woo-wooism on the one hand, nor brains on sticks cognition on the other, but to try to find a way to keep it whole, to bring all of it together into the classroom. It was a timely, immensely helpful call to a young rookie teacher that I was, that would shape my way in the classroom for many subsequent years of teaching college students. And it was one of those moments where one thinks, I wish I could have a long conversation with this man who clearly has so much more wisdom than I do. So during my sabbatical, I asked Parker Palmer if I could travel up to Madison, Wisconsin and spend the day with him and his wife Sharon, and he said yes. So I showed up mid-morning on the given date. We taped until noon, then had a relaxed, easy conversation over a lovely lunch, which Sharon prepared for us. Hearing Parker talk about all sorts of fascinating human beings that he has met and known that I won't name drop for now, but it was a wonderful conversation. Then we taped until mid-afternoon, took pictures, and said goodbye. It was a lovely, beautiful day, which we are grateful to be able to share with you. So here it is, part one of our conversation with Parker J. Palmer. Enjoy. Hello, friends. Lee Seacamp here. Last week in Salt Lake City, I met a station manager from a small town who's given her life to serving her community through public radio. Now, because of massive funding cuts, station managers like her are wondering if they may have to turn off the mic for good. Larger stations are slashing budgets too, cutting the very programming that keeps us connected and often inspired. As a podcast listener, you may or may not know that No Small Endeavor is aired weekly on roughly 100 stations throughout the country. And given the current financial crisis for public radio, we at No Small Endeavor want to help. We're extending the time public radio stations can air our show for free, and we are asking you to join us. For as little as $5 a month, you can help keep No Small Endeavor on the air from Anchorage, Alaska to Jacksonville, Florida. Consider making it more, because by doing so, you're helping spread a bit more beauty, truth, and goodness to communities nationwide. Go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSE Plus today. Help keep the airwaves alive with NSE.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Parker J. Palmer is a writer, speaker, and activist who focuses on issues in education, community, leadership, spirituality, and social change. He's the founder and senior partner emeritus of the Center for Courage and Renewal. He holds a PhD in sociology from the University of California at Berkeley. He's the author of 10 books, including several award-winning titles that have sold over 2 million copies, been translated into 12 languages. Dr. Palmer is a member of the Religious Society of Friends, and Dr. Palmer and his wife Sharon live in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm delighted to be here in Madison at Dr. Palmer's home. Welcome to No Small Endeavor, Parker.
Thank you, Lee. It's great to be with you.
It's a delight to be here with you. Thanks for having me into your home here in the lovely town of Madison, Wisconsin.
Glad to do it. And you picked some good weather, too, when the marauding wolverines are not at the door and it's actually looking like spring out there.
Yes, I was surprised. You know, I hear all the upper Midwest folks complain about the winters, but I arrived and it's just warmer than Nashville. So I don't know what y'all are complaining about up here.
Well, you should have come maybe 2 weeks earlier. I always think about a wonderful comment from the Southern humorist Roy Blount, who visited up here one winter in December, I think. And on the radio, he said, it's pretty clear to me that someone up here in the past did something really, really horrible, because this is not weather, it's divine retribution. Think about that line a lot during our winters.
Well, yeah, my 5 years in the Midwest, knowing lake effect snowstorms there in South Bend, I can understand that, the bitterness of it. But I noted at one place in one of your books where you talk about, I can't remember, I wish I could pull up exactly your language, but you speak about no greater solace than the silence of winter sky dropping snow or something like
snow,
that.
Yeah.
And
it's great silent spectacle, absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, covering everything like grace.
Indeed.
Beautiful, beautiful
Yeah,
sight.
I have one memory of a night in South Bend where we were in the middle of a heavy snow, and I just stepped outside and utterly silent. And it's a glorious memory for me.
Yeah, and there's a lesson in it. If you don't look up, you'll never be aware of it, because you can't hear it. It's not calling attention to itself.
Yeah.
So attentiveness is one of the lessons of winter. All these small things that don't demand your attention, but are very, very beautiful.
Right. Well, I suppose if we're going to have the opportunity to cover a lot of ground today with you, and so grateful for this time with you. But I suppose I want to start first with your notion about vocation. And perhaps one of the reasons, the tagline for our show is exploring what it means to live a good life. And as I read your work on vocation, it seems crucial for you in your life of seeking to live a good life, that coming to some sort of clarity about vocation for you was kind of a central practice for leaning into a good life. And I wonder, here late in your life, and you think about your own pursuit of clarity or an understanding of vocation, what are some of the moments that you're so thankful for, or that you have gratitude for with regard to clarity or pursuit of some understanding, at least, if it's not clarity, about vocation?
That's a great question. And at age 84, you have a lot of moments to think back on. So I'll see if I can collect some of them quickly. I think that my best general answer to that question, Lee, is that I'm particularly grateful for the moments of challenge and difficulty, even for a sense of failure or a sense of being on the wrong track, because those are the moments that clarify things for you. Those are the moments when you have an opportunity to do course correction. I'm a big fan of the title that Gandhi gave to his autobiography, where he writes about his life as My Experiments with Truth. And I think life is a big experiment. And one of the experiments is around that sort of central question, why am I here? Which is a complicated question, because it's not only about who am I, it's also about whose am I. It's a question of selfhood, identity, and integrity on the one hand, and it's a question of community on the other. Where am I planted? What ecosystem am I here to serve? And I think it's important to say that vocation doesn't necessarily equal job, which is a common confusion, I think. It means purpose. It means how are you making meaning in your life, which is a pretty fundamental human need to make meaning or find purpose. And for me, that's been a long series of experiments. It certainly has taken me on a very jagged, irregular course that one could not have imagined during, one's senior year in high school or college when they had vocation day or, what do you want to do with your life? That's an unfolding question for me that keeps appearing in different iterations at different times and yields different answers. I think I was, and I say this a lot to younger people who come to me looking for vocational guidance, struggling with meaning and purpose and wondering what they're called to do in their lives. I like to tell them that things didn't come together for me vocationally until I was 50. Well past halfway through my life, I finally got a sense of how all these meandering trails, which we can talk about later if you'd like, converged in some sense of coherence, at least in my mind and in my work. But until then, I was just doing my best to follow the track that seemed to be opening before me at the time, trying very hard not to press some design on it, but to just feel for the natural openings that would take me a next step and a next step. Sometimes taking me to a dead end, at which point you back up and you find your way back to something that sort of makes sense. Again, we can talk about details later, but that's my general sense of this.
You, on the notion of integrity that you pointed to, you suggest at one point it's possible to live a life other than one's own. And you share how you do a measure of that in lining up kind of lofty ideals for yourself. And then you discovered at some point that's not really who I am. Would you kind of unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are used to this notion and have struggled with this notion that early in life, we sort of do what important, influential people in our lives wanted us to do or expected us to do. Parents, professors, mentors of various sorts, friends who wanted to see us be this or do that. And eventually we have to find our way back to what it is that we're really called to do. And we have voices inside of us that call us in a direction that isn't necessarily an imperative of the soul, but is coming from a different part of our own inner landscape. In the case of these high ideals that I tried to pursue when I was a younger man, I think that's the morality-based or sometimes the spiritually-based and overlapped with the ego-based part of what's inside of me. I want to look noble. I want to emulate the heroes, my heroes who did noble things. But if one is not gifted to do those particular noble things, and no one is gifted to live someone else's life. I mean, Thomas Merton may be my hero. John Lewis may be my hero. But if I'm not gifted to do what they did, then I'm going to make a mess of it. And the effort to be heroic is going to end up being both foolish and perhaps doing some damage. If you're not gifted to pursue a particular vision, you likely will do some damage along the way. So finding out what vision is yours to pursue, again, there's this old Shaker song, to come down in the place just right in life is I think an aspiration that you follow through attentiveness to the clues of your own experience. So you're conducting all of these experiments with your own truth. What are you learning? What's working? What isn't working? And then follow that. At the same time, I think there's a via negativa to vocation. That is, I think there's a negative way in which we learn what it is that we are most fundamentally called to do. I got a PhD at Berkeley, a lot of hard work. In the 60s, 5 years of hard work. But by 1969, when I had finished my degree, thinking I was going to go after an academic career, the cities were burning from issues of racial injustice, which have haunted us from the beginning and haunt us to this day. And I felt very strongly that I needed to use my sociology in the streets, not in the halls of the academy. And so I abandoned academia. I turned down a bunch of professorial jobs, and I went to Washington, D.C. to become a community organizer. A lot of my mentors, a lot of my friends, family members were saying, "This is crazy. Why are you doing this? You're throwing away a great opportunity. You've been prepared for an academic career. You have powerful sponsors and mentors who want to open that path for you. Why are you walking away from it?" And the best answer I could give them then or now was, I can't even explain it fully to myself, but I can tell you this: I can't not do what I'm doing. There's something in me that's saying, don't walk away from this calling, this sense of urgency. Because if you do, and this is language that I came to only years later, if you do, you're going to pay a price with your soul. You can't not do this as a next step in your experiments with truth. And I regard that as a deeply compelling motivation to do about anything. I can't not do it.
Right. The first part of that reminded me, when I was finishing my PhD, I had 2 job offers, and one was to go help start a school in Nairobi. And my wife and I had spent 6 months in Nairobi. We loved Nairobi. We loved our friends there, our people there. And then a second job opportunity was to go to Nashville and teach at my alma mater. And so I was talking with one of my dear friends who's now a professor at Pepperdine, Ron Cox. And he said, "What are you thinking?" And I said, "Well, my guilt tells me I should go to Nairobi, and my desire tells me I should go to Nashville." And he was very gracious, I think, and replied, "Why don't you perhaps trust that your desire comes from God and your guilt maybe doesn't?"
Yeah, right.
And I've always thought that was just very helpful advice that he gave me.
Yeah, it is good advice. I think in the Christian tradition, we have a bad habit sometime of putting on false crosses just because they're crosses. And we need to we need to make the distinction between true crosses and false crosses. I mean, there is some suffering that, it comes with life itself. But there's so many forms of false suffering that we impose on ourselves or that get imposed on us by all those social expectations. So, amen to your friend.
Yeah. You say at one point you came to the place of where the old phrase "let your life speak" came to mean this to you. Before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. Before you tell your life what truths and values you have decided to live up to, let your life tell you what truths you embody, what values you represent. It's a beautiful, beautiful admonition to us.
Thank you.
You several times you tell a story, a Hasidic tale about, I don't know how you pronounce it, Rabbi Zushia?
Zushia.
Yeah, would you tell that story?
Yeah, so the story is from the collected tales of the Hasidim, which were collected, I think, by Martin Buber, about a disciple coming to the Rabbi Zushia saying, Rabbi, Rabbi, or Zushia coming to the great rabbi, the disciple Zushia coming to the great rabbi and saying, Rabbi, Rabbi, before I die, how can I become more like Moses? And the great rabbi says, when you get there, son, they will not ask you why you weren't more like Moses, they will ask you why you weren't more like Zushia. And so, there is a fundamental Christian belief that we are born in the image of God, and that there is, as Quakers would say, I'm a Quaker, there is that of God in everyone. There's this kind of divine imprint that makes every human being of sacred worth. And to me, that means we are stamped with a kind of selfhood, that it's important to try to discern the shape of that selfhood, to understand what this particular kernel is meant to grow into, and to track that growth through its many iterations throughout your life. That doesn't mean that anything is predetermined, because a kernel, just like a gene in our genome, expresses itself differently in different contexts and situations. So there's a lot of discovery to be doing, but there's always this germ of identity and integrity. And if you pay attention, if you're not speeding, or if you're not filling your life with noise and distractions, you know when you're off course. You're uncomfortable, and sometimes it's way beyond discomfort. It's into profound depression or despair, which I've known some of in my life. There are all kinds of ways in which the human self asserts itself and insists on itself. In our culture, we pathologize so much of this, and we say, well, if you're depressed, pop a pill. That may be necessary for some people, because some depressions are, in fact, based in brain chemistry and should be corrected. But so often, depression also has a situational element where we have veered off course. There are, in fact, evolutionary biologists who think that depression was an evolutionary adaptation to keep us from going too far off course. It's a very interesting theory to me, because I've had this experience of wandering so far off course, and then depression hits, depriving you of energy or will to wander any farther off course, which actually can help save your soul if you pay attention to it. So there is this, I think, inexhaustible source of guidance within us, which certainly can be named true self, something Thomas Merton wrote about a lot, identity and integrity. It's named many different ways in different traditions, but every wisdom tradition I know anything about has a way of naming that core of self that constantly is saying, pay attention to me and figure out what this means in your current context.
Yeah. So there are there's some who are suggesting, I'm thinking of one writer, for example, who says, follow your passion is terrible advice. Because if you sit around waiting until you feel passion, you'll never do the work that you've got to do to become good in a given field. How do you respond to that? What do you think about that?
Well, passion is an interesting word because it also roots in suffering. It isn't just joy. It's suffering as well. So I think hard work is a necessary component of any vocational path, no matter how you construe it, where it's coming from, how you understand it. And when I said a few minutes ago that one of my biggest vocational clues was I can't not do this, with that, I can easily say, at the moment when I was making that decision to walk away from academia and become a community organizer in Washington, D.C., I was not feeling incredibly excited and enthusiastic about all the vocational and financial risks that was going to entail for a guy who was married and by that time had 2 and then 3 kids. I just wasn't feeling like, boy, am I wild crazy to jump off a cliff and do this, knowing that I would have a secure income as a professor, but not as a community organizer, where I knew going in that we would be raising our own salaries 3 months at a time from foundations, federal and local grants. So I have no trouble saying, yeah, wild enthusiasm doesn't always come with this follow your heart or follow your identity and integrity, especially if you understand this is something you can't not do.
Yeah.
That doesn't go hand in hand with wild enthusiasm about risk-taking, but risk-taking is involved. Anytime you get off the beaten path, risk-taking is involved. Mm-hmm. And I think I was just built in such a way that had I not taken that risk, I'd be sitting here today, I think, feeling pretty impoverished by the road not taken.
Paradox has been another key recurring theme in your work. And you quote Niels Bohr several times.
Yeah.
You share that with us and talk about how paradox has been crucial for you?
Yeah, well, Niels Bohr was the Nobel Prize-winning physicist. We all know him from physics class, where we looked at the Bohr model of the atom that you could sort of build out of Tinker Toys or something like that. And Niels Bohr once said this very interesting thing. He said, the opposite of an ordinary fact is a lie, but the opposite of one great truth may be another great truth. Now, it's important to note that he didn't say the opposite of one great truth is another great truth. It may be another great truth. That's an act of discernment. But I like that statement a lot, and I think it nails the heart of paradox for me, so that a paradox is understood as a both-and statement rather than an either-or statement. And in that sense, it kind of flies in the face of a lot of Western logic. In Western logic, we're constantly talking about it's either this or that. Mm-hmm. We have this binary system on which computers are based, for example. It's a 1 or a 0. But in an alternative way of looking at the universe, which is more, I think, commonplace in Eastern than Western cultures, there's a lot of both and. So I'll put it to you this way. Are we made for community? Absolutely yes. Whether you look at us biologically or theologically, we're made for community. We come from community. We're sustained by community. We're accountable to community. The community's fate and our fate are closely intertwined. We're made for community. Are we made for solitude? Absolutely yes. There are parts of life, journeys in life, that you can take only by yourself. No one can come along with you, no matter how helpful they want to be. I'm acutely aware of this, not only because I'm 84 and I'm looking at the passage of time, where eventually I will have to take a journey into dying that I can take only by myself. But I'm also, as you know, Lee, sitting here grieving a sister who died 3 weeks ago. And as much as I wanted to take that journey with her, holding hands, as it were, that could not be. She had to draw on all of her inner resources to take that journey alone. So the paradox is we're made for solitude and we're made for community. And if we try to split that paradox into choices, like, shall I go the communal route or shall I go the solitary route, we end up with a very unhealthy form of life. There's so much in life that where we have to hold together the both and in order to be whole. And in fact, both and is the form of wholeness. Either or is always a form of brokenness. And so, yeah, paradox has been huge for me. This is why, for example, I look at education I look at the kind of education that focuses exclusively on cognition, on the operations of the human brain, as only half, at best, of an important paradox. Good education ought to be about all of the forms of intelligence that we hold in this both-and reality that we live, at very least, cognition and emotion, cognition and feeling, heart and brain. Only so can we educate students to function as whole human beings, rather than as thinking machines or just blobs of emotionality. We separate these things out, I think, and do damage to people and to the world that these people influence. So when we get a politics, for example, that is infused with a lot of irrationality that comes from the emotive side of life and is never clarified by an act of thinking, we're in real trouble. And when we have a politics that is only calculated, analytic, pragmatic, strategic, we're also in trouble because it eliminates feeling, empathy for the human self and all of the selves that are impacted by politics. So this is more than an abstract philosophical concern for me. It's a lived issue that we need to get better about.
I think that one of the things that this invitation to embrace paradox does for me is it puts me at a posture of curiosity. And it reminds me of one of my friends for a decade further along in teaching than me. When I first started as a rookie teacher, I remember him telling me that he thought of one of the best things he did for his students was to give them better questions to ask. And that deeply informed the way I then thought about my teaching was if I can give my students better questions to ask that they can then take with them for years, I've done them a really helpful service, I think. But I think your emphasis on paradox similarly draws us into a sort of posture of curiosity rather than getting something nailed down.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight. I'm not sure I ever made that connection in my own mind, but you're absolutely right. If you have an appreciation for paradox, you're always going to ask in response to anything that's said to you, what's the other side of that? And that's the kind of curiosity that drives us forward. That's the kind of curiosity that asks the questions that otherwise don't get asked if you just settle for 50% of what's real or true.
Yeah.
So that's a nice connection. Thanks.
Another element, when I was thinking back, I told you when I reached out to you that you came to my university, I think at the end or start of my first or second year teaching, and we're lecturing on Courage to Teach. And as I've reread back through Courage to Teach and was asking myself, what can I identify that I remember resonating with so deeply? And a lot of it was the ways you just were talking about subjectivity, objectivity, though we didn't use that language, but the way you develop in the book a sort of embrace of both subjectivity and objectivity in our knowing. That definitely was a significant piece that's informed the way I've thought about my teaching. But perhaps even more than that is the emphasis that you give on seeing our teaching as an exercise in letting ourselves be known to our students, which is in some ways can be a terrifying sort of exercise. But telling, sharing, accepting. And I do want to note here, I want to wait until maybe this afternoon. You mentioned your own experience with depression. I want to wait till this afternoon to talk about that. But I would like to hear from you now, if it's okay, to tell us more about this practice of telling, sharing, accepting, telling one's trespasses, telling one's failures. How did you end up emphasizing this as such a significant element of the work of a teacher or the work of being human?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is that this emphasis on, let me just call it being human in front of our students, as fully human as we're able to be, came for me in at least two ways. One is I started to realize I'm revealing myself to them all the time, whether I intend to or not. My students aren't stupid. They're constantly looking at what's behind the mask, what's behind the posture. And it won't hurt. It will probably help if I can take that mask off and open the posture a bit to give them more of what's really there rather than leaving it to their imaginings. It's always better to just know what's there than not. Among other things, when you don't know what's there, it's scary. Is this guy going to leap out from behind the mask and bite my head off? So that's one very basic reason. Doesn't much matter what I intend to do. I'm self-revelatory in every moment of my life.
Very helpful.
To anyone who's paying attention. But the other reason is that this business of hiding the self in the act of teaching or in the act of scholarship seemed to me to be contributing to this mythos of objectivism, which intellectually has never made any sense to me at all. This notion that we know best by distancing ourselves from objects of knowing, and maintaining a pristine antiseptic distance so that those objects are, as it were, untainted by the touch of human hands. Well, there's no such thing as an object that is untainted by the touch of human hands. The very process, the very movement of wanting to know the world impacts the world. Physicists have proven that. That as soon as you move into a field of knowing, you're making a difference in that field. And the only reports that we'll ever get out of that field involve both what we observed and the presence of the observer. So let's just get straight about that. Let's acknowledge that. And let's also acknowledge that the greatest science gets done not at a great distance from the object, but through a really complex blend of data and logic and intimacy, not with an object, but with a subject of knowledge. A drawing close through a passion to know and understand. The objective knowledge doesn't come from one person standing on Mars and looking at something on Earth. Objective knowledge comes as various passionate observers of a phenomenon form a community of inquiry, following the same protocols, the same rules of evidence and rules of inquiry and analysis, and reach consensus on what it is they're seeing. Objectivity is the result of a lot of intersubjective exploration. Any decent textbook on science will tell you that objectivity comes from intersubjectivity, which means people saying, yeah, that's what I see too, and that's what I understand as I apply the protocols in a faithful rendition of this discipline, whatever it may be, history, chemistry, literary analysis, whatever. And so I wanted to, I wanted to bust through that myth as best I could, because it seemed to me that this this myth of objectivism was rendering everything about teaching and learning distant and dull and unenlivening for anybody. And it was ramping up fear in the students, the fear that they would get it wrong because there's an objective standard for what's right. Well, yes, there is, but it's temporary. It's what physicists have determined at this moment is the story of a quasar or another subatomic particle. But if you look at what that story was in 1921, it's a different story than it is in 2023. And so I always ended up in my lectures on the Courage to Teach saying, if you want to teach your students to be in the community of truth, to be in the community of seekers of truth, which I think ought to be our goal for all of our students, it's not enough to teach them the conclusions of the moment and say, if you can memorize this stuff and pass the test, then you get a credential from this institution. Instead, you want to teach them how to be in the community of inquiry, how to be in the community of truth. And that involves all kinds of skills that have to do with cognition, that have to do with emotion, that have to do with relational capacities. Our knowledge, for example, in a variety of fields has changed as membership in these disciplinary communities of truth have changed. So as more women have joined the sciences or any of the disciplines, as more people of color have joined any of the disciplines, as more people of diverse sexual orientation and identity have joined these communities of inquiry, our knowledge has shifted, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. But you look at any history of the United States of America that was written before Black scholars took on the work of writing American history, and you're looking at a fairy tale that never existed. Today, you're looking at a lot more truth, and obviously that truth is challenging a lot of people who don't want that kind of history taught. But that's what it means for our students to join in an inquiry. It's not just about knowing how to be a historian. It's about knowing how to be a historian in a diverse company of historians. So the relational skills are just as important as the cognitive and skills and the emotional intelligence. Yeah, so I think that all loops back to why it is that I have to show up as a real human being in my classroom.
Related to that, this notion of courage is in the title of perhaps your best-known book, Courage to Teach. It's in the title of your Center for Courage and Renewal. Why courage? Why has courage been such a significant virtue for you?
You know, I sometimes think that the reason the Courage to Teach has done very well as a book is simply because it has courage in the title. And I think what that said to a lot of teachers is, I'm glad that someone recognizes that it takes courage to teach, which is a very different approach than tips, tricks, and techniques for being a good teacher, which is the kind of vibe that a lot of that literature gives off. And I think the first reason I put courage in the title of The Courage to Teach is that I think a good teacher is gutsy. I think a good teacher is a risk taker. A good teacher is not someone who dominates the class with an endless lecture and then simply demands that people feed it back. A good teacher takes the risk of opening the discussion to hear questions that he or she doesn't want to hear or he or she doesn't know how to answer. Takes the risk of having to say, I don't know the answer to that. Let's go find out together. Takes the risk of running into dilemmas that are really hard to work your way out of. Takes the risk of hearing a racist or homophobic comment in the middle of a class and not knowing how to handle it. But that's live encounter. That's what human beings do as they wrestle with life and with each other. And I think it takes courage to enter that force field and to find your way through it. And so I guess the word just came very naturally to me. I think, as I talk, I realize, and this is an interesting thing about talking, if you pay attention to your own talk, you realize, oh, there's another layer here. Teaching has always scared the crap out of me. It always has. I love to teach, but I feel like, I always feel like I am carrying a load that I'm not up to, that I'm trying to meet expectations that I'm not qualified to meet. I was the first person in my family to go to college. So I didn't come from a learned tradition. I had a very lazy high school, 4 years in high school, graduated somewhere below the midpoint in my class of 500 students, and lucked out by getting into a very good college, and lucked out even more by finding some mentors who saw possibilities in me that I never saw in myself. I never imagined having an academic career. I never imagined writing a book. And all through my schooling, whether at Carleton College in Minnesota or Union Seminary in New York or the University of California at Berkeley, I was running scared. I felt like a fraud. I felt like an imposter. I felt like if they ever find out how dumb I am, they're going to kick me out of here and never want me to darken their door again. And I don't think there's been a moment in my academic peregrinations as a lecturer, visiting professor, writer who shows up with his books on a campus, when I didn't feel that sense of, I'm in way over my head here. So I guess if I'm really honest, I would say, well, it took me courage to step up to all of that. But like, I don't know, courage is a weird word in a way, because people who do, let me flip here and say that whenever I have observed people doing courageous things that I regard as courageous, and I've commented to them on it, they will always say, oh, that wasn't courage. Anybody would have done that. I was there. There was a need. I did what I had to do. So I think for me, it's been more a process of, these are things I can't not do or couldn't not do. And I think part of the dynamic of my life is that we were talking earlier, Lee, about both of us being people who are kind of evenly split between extrovert and introvert. So my life on the road, that extroverted life, which took courage to do many, many years in the last 50 years, when I would come home into a week or two of solitude as a writer, the energy it took to get out there and to deal with all the feedback finally had a place in silence and solitude to be absorbed, to be interpreted, to be understood. And so the wounding experiences that I had in pursuing, in expressing my own courage to teach, actually became a very important part of growing my thinking and sharpening my thinking and reaching further into new levels of understanding, which I'm doing to this very day. Sometimes I'll look back on things that I've written and I'll say, ooh, ouch, did I write that? I wish I could pull that off the shelves right away.
Right.
But all of that that has to do with falling short or with failing is such a prod to learning.
It has been so delightful to see more and more listeners like you sign up for NSC Plus. Our growing community is made up of intelligent and thoughtful people looking for a holistic approach to human flourishing. Signing up for NSC Plus is also a way to support the show and the work we're doing, and in fact, we depend upon that kind of support. But in addition to supporting the show, you'll get exclusive access to bonus content, and the No Small Endeavor you've come to love will be completely ad-free. In fact, you won't even hear ads like this one. So go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus to become a member of our community today. Join for as little as $5 a month. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com, click on that red button that says Join NSC Plus to become a member today.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
I'm always looking for ways to show my cat how much I love her. And with Fancy Feast gems, I can pamper her whenever I want with a savory gravy on top of a gourmet mousse pâté. The pyramid shape makes serving simple, so all I have to do is peel and plate to make mealtime feel extra fancy. And with 2 entrees in every pack, it's easy to turn every day into the extraordinary. Fancy Feast gems.
I'm going to tell you a quick story that I might have told when you first asked the question about showing up as your true self, warts and all, with your students. But it was a very formative story in my life, and it comes to me at this moment. So at one faculty workshop that I did, a 3-day workshop, we were having lunch on the second day, a bunch of us at this table for 7 or 8, all men around the table. And a conversation somehow got started about one of these guys said something about having gone to college planning to be a doctor and then having failed organic chemistry and realizing doctoring wasn't his calling, but having discovered on the other side of that failure, having discovered medieval English literature as the passion of his life, which he was teaching with great satisfaction to this day. Every other professor around that table had a similar story to tell of something that, where the tires just blew out on them during college, but having to stop by the roadside and get the car repaired gave them a chance to redirect towards the field that really gave them lasting satisfaction that they were teaching even now. I had my own story along those lines, and as we were breaking up to go back to the afternoon session, I said, before we leave, I just want to ask how many of you have ever told that story to the students in your classes? And not a one of them said, I have. Not a one of them. And I said, look, that's not a terribly vulnerable story to tell. It's not a confession of a failure, really. It was at the time a sense of failure. But what I hope you'll understand is that you've got students sitting in your class right now scared to death about failing your course. Mm-hmm. You could help them, you could support them, you could relieve them greatly by blessing certain kinds of failures as clues to the right direction for one's life. So that's an example of what I mean by showing up as yourself, your true self, with not every element of your experience. Some are too intimate and private. Students have no right to them, and you have no need to tell them. But when it's task-related, as those stories were, seems to me there's good reason to tell them.
You mentioned, I think the word you used were wounds or wounding as a result of being out doing your own forms of teaching, which prompts me to wonder, what was the nature of some of that wounding that you experienced? Or another way perhaps into that would be simply to ask, how have you processed, framed, experienced criticism and critique, and what have you done with that?
Mm-hmm. That's been a struggle for me over the years, and maybe that's why the word wounding came to mind. But it's also been one of those kind of a growth moment, but a sort of forced growth moment. I mean, I think there are some times when we're forced to grow or we die. And the growth may not happen immediately, but if it doesn't happen eventually, then we die. So I've become more appreciative of honest criticism over the years, but at first that was not at all the case. I do remember one moment that's always been vivid for me. I was lecturing at a Class 1 research university about the themes of the courage to teach, which back in the day weren't all that popular at the highly objectivist institutions.
Yeah, I would imagine not.
Where even things like service learning were not acceptable. I mean, if you were at a little community college somewhere, you could do service learning, but not at an Ivy League institution or a top flight research institution. So I gave this lecture, and there was a man in the back of the audience, they're usually in the back of the audience, who was eager to get to his feet.
I'm flashing back to all sorts of people in the back of the room. Yes, I know what you mean.
They hide away in the shadows, and they leap out like Tommy's
and
mother.
And they almost always stand, don't they?
Yeah, they always stand. They always stand. They always remind me of, the old Smothered Brothers routine where Tommy's talking about the vicious puma leaping from a crevasse. So this guy stood up and leapt, and then he said, "Well, I've got you figured out." And I thought, well, this will be interesting, And he said, "You're just a 19th century romantic up there, talking to us from that standpoint." And I waited for him to go on, but he just sat down. And I thought, well, that's like a drive-by insult, and I can't let that pass. So I was somehow given the grace to say, I'm not a 19th century romantic. I'm Parker Palmer. I'm a human being. I stand here before you with my mind and my heart intact. And I ask you, do you have more you'd like to say so that we might have a conversation?
What a beautiful response.
I learned so much from that response. And I'm sure that was built on all kinds of prior, smaller, less dramatic experiences where the knife didn't get stuck in so directly, but where I went home thinking, I wish I had had something to say in response to that, because sometimes I just got tongue-tied or, I took another part of what that person said and ran with it and just hoped that not everybody heard what I heard with the sharpness that I heard it. But that the response that I made to that gentleman in that moment, to which he had no response, he never came back, which was very interesting to me, and it was awkward moment in the audience because they didn't. I think some of them wanted to cheer, that kind of academic snottiness had been dealt with in that way, had kind of been exposed. This isn't a game. This is two human beings talking with one another. Do you want to be one of them? Was kind of the gist of it. But I think that it, as I said, that it built on a lot of smaller moments of really having to think long and hard about what do I do with critiques that I understand at a level that maybe others in the audience don't understand, that where my nerve endings are out. And I think that's one of the reasons that I have tried over the years to learn to write in a way that anticipates the debate. So that if you can make a claim about X, Y, or Z, and that it's going to run into opposition in the audience for which you're writing, you can at the same time say, let us consider this from some other angles, from some critical angles. Does it still hold water? And in that way, save yourself a lot of trouble and grow intellectually, because sometimes you find out it doesn't hold water, and then you change your mind.
Right. Related to this, I saw that you have referred to yourself several times in your writing as thin-skinned.
Mm-hmm.
Would you still call yourself thin-skinned, or would you say that you've developed other ways of relating to the world?
I think I've developed other ways of relating to the world, especially politically, because thin skin doesn't work very well in that arena. But here's a truthful statement, Lee. I've been very blessed, I guess, in my life as a writer and a speaker, public intellectual, whatever the phrase is, to have drawn a considerable following of people who seem to really love my work and have been nurtured by it. And they tell me about this all the time. I don't think a day goes by when I don't get an email. Part of it is because of my age. People want to say something to me before I check out about how much the work has meant. But what that has meant is that over the last, I'd say, 20 years, I've heard less and less from my critics and more from my fans. And I miss the critics because the critics always helped me grow. I know they're out there, but when you don't hear from them, or you don't hear the exact shape of their argument, you know, it's hard to evolve and develop your own thought. And I think what that does is it makes me look back with more appreciation on those moments when a criticism came, penetrated my thin skin, and found me wanting, which meant that I had to repair to my study and figure things out at a deeper level. And sometimes I was wrong. I need to correct that mistake. And sometimes it was, I still think I got that right, but I obviously need to say something in response to this critique that will help that person understand better what it is that I'm trying to say. Because I think this is about misinterpretation or something like that. There's one story that comes to me. So the very first book that I ever published, which was an accidental book. I didn't set out to write a book. I was just writing essays, and through this amazing series of events, an editor actually at Notre Dame got a hold of some of my essays and published my first book in 1979 called The Promise of Paradox, a celebration of contradictions in the Christian life, which opened with an essay about Thomas Merton. And then about, 15 years ago, Harper Collins came along, or no, maybe it was Josie Bass came along and said, we'd like to republish that book, which had gone out of print recently. And I said, okay, that'll be great. And they said, well, why don't you write a new foreword for it? And I said, I'd be glad to do that, which required me to read what I had written in 1979. And I found some of it appalling. And it wasn't because I was wrong. It was just because I was writing in a language that I wouldn't use these days, and a language that could, I think, in our times, be misinterpreted. And that was really awkward. And I'm sitting there thinking, what do I do with this? Do I edit the book itself? Do I change the text? Well, I finally came to a conclusion, and I wrote something like this in the foreword. I am now, I can't remember what I was at the time, I'm going to say, I'm now 70 years old. I wrote this book when I was 40 years old. There are things in this book that I would not say today. I would not commit to the printed page. Things that I find embarrassing. But I have decided that my 40-year-old self should be allowed free speech just as much as my 70-year-old self. So although I disagree with this guy rather vigorously in the way he expressed himself at certain points, I'm going to let him have his say. Please be merciful. Something like that. I enjoyed writing that,
like that
so much.
I like that.
I enjoyed writing it so much.
Yeah, I tell people that doing theology in the Bible Belt is a contact sport. It's taken very personally, and people get really, really worked up about stuff. And I will oftentimes, hear from people, I really disagree with you about such and so. And I've learned that I can sincerely and honestly and with a laugh say, I often disagree and don't like what I say either. But I think it's that same sort of notion of if we can realize that we're even in conversation with ourselves, right? That sort of person, that human engagement that you asked that critic to have with you that he couldn't have with you. Mm-hmm. Not only are we trying to do that with other people, we're also trying to do it with ourselves, because we're trying to, that goes back to Gandhi and his experiments with truth, right?
Great point. Great point. Yeah, we are a walking conversation.
Right.
We should never forget that.
Right. Yeah. So, notions of leadership. I love this line that a leader, a teacher, is one who can hear another into speech. What a beautiful phrase. But unpack that for us.
Well, to the best of my memory, I got that line from Nell Morton, a feminist theologian of maybe 20 or 25 years ago, who said that the great task in our time is to hear each other into speech. Mm. And I often add into deeper and deeper speech. Mm. And I think it's a particular art which you, as an interviewer, call upon all the time. And that's as a good interviewer. And that is that you ask other people questions that require them to dig a little deeper into themselves and find out more about the answer behind the answer, to find out more about sort of what's going on in there as you respond to this question. If you're open to doing that, if you're willing to have that conversation with yourself, I think you're aware that at a couple points in this very conversation, this very interview, I've had that experience. Mm-hmm. Oh, there's something deeper down that I need to mention in order to be truthful. And to me, that's a huge, huge service to other people. One of my favorite phrases that I think I first committed to paper is that in Western society, we have a strange conceit that just because we've said something, we understand what it means. And I think there's a lot of evidence to prove that that's not the case, So when we are with someone who is willing to ask questions, good questions, searching questions, even though they've read what we have to say about the topic or they've heard what we have to say about the topic, we have this opportunity to be heard into deeper speech. Mm. And we often come up with insights that we didn't know we had, and self-corrections that we didn't know we could make, and just ways of getting clearer about who we are and what the world is like and how the two interact with each other. This is something that I've learned a lot about from my travels with the Quaker community, because in many ways, the bottom line in Quaker faith and practice is listen, 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 listen. This is why Quakers, at least the branch that I belong to, the unprogrammed friends, as they're called, worship. They don't worship the silence, they worship in the silence. There's no clergy person, there's no preaching, there's no scripture for the day. There's a gathering of people who listen for whatever may be alive in them and their world and in the movement of the Spirit as they understand it, and occasionally out of that silence will speak of what they are hearing, which may be a blessing, a struggle, a fear, a hope. The Spirit speaks in many different ways, but it's the Quaker understanding that in the cosmos, the Spirit has never stopped speaking, so that it's not all captured in a book that was assembled at a particular date in human history and codified as the Word, but that Word is still spoken, and it's spoken through poets, and it's spoken through contemporary affairs, and it's spoken through, all of the everydayness of our lives if we listen. And so hearing each other into speech obviously involves listening at the root, and then with that listening, asking those good, honest, open questions that aren't questions that nudge anybody in a particular direction that we want them to go. When I teach the process of honest, open questioning in some of the retreat work that I do, I'll say, for example, have you thought about seeing a therapist is not an honest, open question. kind of a little piece of advice in disguise. So, but have you ever had an experience like that before? And if the person says yes, so what did you learn from that experience that might be useful to you today? Those are honest, open questions, because you can't sit there thinking, I know the right answer to this question, and I sure hope this person gives it to me. So I think that in today's world, there is this huge unmet wound in people. I'll put it in the form of a need. They need to be heard. They need to know that they are visible to someone. They need to know that someone is listening to what they have to say. I think a lot of our political pathologies are rooted in the fact that there's a big gaggle of people who just feel unheard and unseen and unvalued. It goes downhill from there when that becomes a political ideology. So, yeah, hearing each other into speech seems critically important to me.
Along with hearing others into speech, you speak of, with regard to leadership, the need for one to make what you call the Rosa Parks decision, that is to live divided no more. Will you unpack that for us a little bit?
Sure. That's a biggie.
Yeah.
That's a biggie. Because that loops back to our earlier conversation about identity and integrity. Rosa Parks always stands out for me. It wasn't a one-woman revolution that she started. She was embedded in centuries of effort to liberate Black souls in the American context. So I'm not indulging in a heroic one-person theory of history here. But she took an action that was emblematic of what a lot of other people were struggling to come to at that time. And that was, on that day, on the bus in Birmingham, Alabama, what was it, December 5th, 1955, I think. She came to the decision that she would no longer act on the outside in a way that betrayed a truth she knew on the inside. And that truth was very simply that she was a full human being entitled to the same respect and the same rights as any other human being. And she tipped the moral arc of history in the right direction by taking that act of living divided no more, of bringing down the wall of fear, for example, that works on a lot of us, that it's not possible to express outwardly in word and act the truth we hold dear inwardly, and that if we do, we will pay a huge price. There will be a substantial penalty for living divided no more. That's a very powerful form of social control. When you say to people, if you really come out with your stuff, you really tell us your truth, we're going to punish you in one way or another. And that can range anywhere from social sanctions that make you the unwashed and the untouchable among us, all the way to physical brutality and even to death. And we have plenty of examples to prove it in our time. Most folks in the LGBTQ plus community can tell you a lot about how that works. And so there's an act of courage here, but as is often the case with courage, it deserves close examination. I'm convinced that for people who have changed the course of human history by deciding to act divided no more, people like Rosa Parks, people like Nelson Mandela, people like Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia, people like Dorothy Day of the Catholic worker movement, et cetera, et cetera. These people have fundamentally transfigured the logic of punishment and reward. And they've realized at some point in their lives that, yes, I will be punished if I stop living this divided life. But no punishment anyone could ever lay upon me could possibly be greater than the punishment I lay upon myself for conspiring in my own diminishment. Conspiring in my own diminishment. Now, morally speaking, I take that as worthy of deep reflection. What am I doing that conspires in my own diminishment? What social mores am I going along with in order to stay safe that actually end up with me conspiring in my own diminishment? If I can get clear on that, step by step, day by day, I can more fully lean into those words and acts that might nudge the moral arc of history a little bit in the right direction. And that, it seems to me, is what the Rosa Parks story is all about.
Just one line, I'll just read where you summarize that. They've come to understand that no punishment anyone might inflict on them could possibly be worse than the punishment they inflict on themselves by conspiring in their own diminishment. You've written a lot on nonviolent social change, and I would assume that this is another sort of emphasis in your work that's informed by your Quakerism. But what gives you hope in this regard in the day and age in which we find ourselves, and what discourages you in that regard in the day and age in which we find ourselves?
Yeah, well, I don't want to seem Pollyannish here, and I don't want to say that I never get discouraged, but I don't regard hopelessness as a good career choice. And I think it is a matter of choice to some extent. I think it is for me anyway. It seems to me that if I were to embrace hopelessness, all that's just left to do is to get a chair and turn it toward a corner and sit there sucking my thumb all day. That seems to me not a fit way for an adult to live. Hope, it seems to me, is not just an attitude, it's an action. And as long as there's something that I can do that might contribute to a better world in whatever way it is that I'm able to address it, whatever is within my reach, that I should do. I valued deeply the experience I had starting at age 29 as a community organizer working in Washington, D.C. on racial justice, because that got me in touch with a lot of Black activists who, in ways that I never saw any white person do, constantly invoked the ancestors, not just their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents, but 12, 13 generations of ancestors who never gave up hope. There is no story from Black history that ends with the statement, and then we gave up. There is just no such story. And I started to realize that they were getting hope from the fact that what brought them to where they were, in this case in the mid-60s, in America, and the civil rights movement, and the changing of the lay and the law of the land, what brought them to where they were a million tiny acts of hope taken by people who had only 1 degree of freedom at best. But if they could use that 1 degree of freedom to gather in an underground church service, to sing a hymn, to say a prayer, and to do all the things, for example, that allowed them to build the Underground Railroad as a social system, to start helping enslaved human beings escape to freedom in the North, then they were going to do that. That's exactly what they were going to do. And I just feel that I've read a lot about that history. I highly recommend, for example, Vince Harding's book, There Is a River, a wonderful, wonderful piece of Black history by a marvelous Black historian whom I had the privilege to work with. The more I learn about Black history, the more it becomes impossible for me to say, well, I'm just going to give up. That would seem to me to be a moral fault of a very gross nature. And even on my worst days, I'm not willing to go there. There are clearly days when the news is crushing, and you have to do something to breathe again, to revive your spirit. And I think, generally speaking, that's something that activists, and maybe especially white activists, haven't been good at doing. We haven't, especially among the men involved in social change, we haven't been good at self-care, which has been one of the most violent, really, parts, I think, of what's meant to be a nonviolent movement. Because when you don't care for yourself, you're going to end up lashing out in various ways at people near and far, and it's going to get ugly. So I'm a big fan of a woman named Valerie Kaur, Kaur, who is of the Sikh religion, who's written a book called See No Stranger, came out, I guess, about 2 years ago, who I think is laying the foundation for a new nonviolent movement that in a good, strong, outreaching feminist way includes an important element of self-care and team care, as she calls it, among those who are engaged in nonviolent social change efforts. Absolutely critical, I think, to sustaining the movement. So for me, during COVID, when I was unable to get together with other people, that self-care involved taking a day off and walking in the woods, before I returned to whatever the activity was with which I was trying to do a little nudging of the moral arc of history.
Your reply reminds me of the Christian tradition in which despair is seen as a sin against the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm. Acedia, was it? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know how far that goes back to, but yeah.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.